Hi. Since my last video on fixing the SMA connector, I know there's been a lot of discussion about how to reinforce the SMA connectors to prevent this from happening. And I know Carl's been talking to a number of us in the community to brainstorm ideas, including myself, and he's also working really hard with his team to make sure that the March batch of goggles doesn't have that same problem. Among users, I know that several of us have been talking about various solutions for preventing, for reinforcing the SMA connectors ourselves. So that includes adding additional internal nuts, people looking at using O-rings in place of the serrated ring. And the idea there is that the serrated ring doesn't really, it needs a flat surface to sit against. And this shape here it's conical. It's not flat. So the serrated ring doesn't like sitting up against that. The idea of adding internal nuts is that without the internal nut, when you tighten that external nut down, you're basically pulling on this SMA on the board, on the connection with the board. And we think that you don't want to do that. You want to pull on an internal nut. So you're pulling directly against the SMA connector. The solution that I was going to kind of talk about today in detail was the install of some 3D printed parts that Tim and I, Tim's a fellow in the HDZero Discord, Tim FPV, have been working on. And they provide a little conical piece that provides an external surface for the serrated ring to sit up against. An internal spacer, and there's two versions. There's one that has a spot for a nut, which I liked the idea of, so that you'd kind of have that be pulling against the nut. There was also another version that's just a solid piece, and the idea of the solid piece is that it sits up against this nice square surface down here. Maybe that works fine, but I just felt like the nut was a little bit more secure, or a little bit more surface area for the plastic to push against. So that's the one I'm going to use today, but you can do what you want. All right. So kind of the order of operations here is a little important. So the reason why I have this plastic part at all here, well, it's for two reasons. One is that it might be fine. There might be enough surface area there, but there's a little bit of a gap between the SMA connector and the nut. And I wanted that 3D printed part to act like a washer to kind of help spread out that force. Because the ring around the nut is really not much bigger than that hole. So the idea here is that you press your nut on there and basically screw it down to the bottom. I'm actually going to separate out these boards to make this easier to work with, if I can find my screwdriver. And by the way, when you're taking this board out on this side, okay. Well then, I guess I already unscrewed it. All right. When you're taking this board out, they're gonna be on this side. It's gonna be in there like that, and if you try and take it out as one piece, it's really hard. But you can pretty easily access the screw on one side, unscrew it, and then you can take out the connector board first. And then you have access to the SMA board. I think somebody pointed out, I pointed out in my last video, somebody else pointed it out too, that the reason why Carl probably wouldn't want to just replace the board if it isn't necessary is that these Divimath chips are kind of one of the more expensive things in the goggles. So really, if we can, it's best to fix them. And I believe Carl's actually been fixing them, not just throwing them away. All right, so I got this screwed on here, and there's a couple things about it. So it has a flat, which fits up against there. So once it's in there, you can't really rotate it. It kind of isn't awesome. I tried making a smaller one that just has that. I mean, maybe that's fine, but it just, it's not very substantial if you get rid of the rest of the material, so it can actually spin in there. But what you can do is you can kind of, if you need to adjust it, you can pop it off a little bit and you can give it a rotation. So you can give it, you still have some fine control there on the orientation of that connector, of that nut. All right, and the way these are sized, assuming that Divimath is using a good jig, and I would think that they would be, you should basically be able to screw it almost all the way on, and that should be good. The plastic's gonna have a little bit of flex into it, and I'll talk about that in a moment. By the way, I printed mine in PETG. I think Tim, he sized his to print in TPU. I don't know entirely which one is the best option, but that's just, you know, I'm figuring this out. All right. I like PETG. I felt it was good. It's pretty durable. It's got a little bit of give, but not very much. And it's not going to creep. What you really don't want to do, you don't want to use PLA, because PLA, when it gets warm, even if it's not melted, it can creep. And so I definitely wouldn't use PLA. I'd use PETG, and I think TPU seems good. You could probably use ABS as well. You want to use something that's not going to creep if you like leave your goggles in the car or something. All right. So what I'm looking at here with the spacing is I want the connector at the right height that when I put this collar on it, it's going to be centered. And I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to put a nut on. I'm going to put my top grommet on. And I'm going to put my ring nut on. Here, I'm going to push these down the rest of the way. Okay. And my ring nut. and tighten it. And the reason why I'm doing this now is there's going to be just like a little bit of flex in that plastic. And so I want to take out that flex and see how it's going to center up. So now I can put it in there and I can see it looks here. If I kind of get it, I can see it's not centered. It's sort of being pulled to the top. So what I can do is I can take this back out. Well, I kind of have two options. One, if it's, well, here, in this case, I need to take it back out. If it wasn't quite there, I could try giving just like a little bit of a turn to the top just to see if there was any, if maybe it just wasn't fully seated. But here I want to add just a little bit more of a gap. So I'm just going to take it out. And so then I want this SMA to sit lower, so I can give this maybe, I'm going to give it a full turn. So now I have a little bit more of a gap here. I'm going to see how that fits. Yeah, I think I want to do, well, do I want to do a full turn or a half turn? I think I'm going to do a half turn. So now this is facing the wrong way, but I can just pop that off and I can turn it around and set it. All right. And put my bushing back on. Put my ring back on. Thread this back up. Oh, it's just riveting video content, isn't it? I thought about live streaming this, but I don't know. If you think it would have been better as a live stream, let me know in the comments, I guess. So here I talked about that spring versus drag. Drag is constant force. Spring force increases as you turn. So I'm just turning it until I feel all that drag force has been taken up, and once the amount of force to turn it starts going up, then I know I can stop. Or give it like another quarter turn. All right, so now I'm going to press this back in. I'm going to see where we're at. All right, and that looks pretty centered to me, so I think that's good. So I'm going to take this fitting back out, and then I'm going to talk about the spacer issue. Oh, I shouldn't have taken that out first. Okay, I'll put it back in. All right, so I have some feeler gauges. If you don't have feeler gauges, you can use like anything solid that you can stuff in there. Because I kind of expect that this gap here is gonna vary between goggles. So like even on this side, my gap was these are imperial feeler gauges because they're like 50 years old or something. But I don't know. I got them from my father one day, and I don't know where he got them from. But so it's 0.025 inches, about 0.6 millimeters. And on this side, it's a little bit bigger. There's a little bit of adjustment in here. So if I loosen the top nut, I can just slide this around just a little bit. So there's just a little bit of flexibility there. So it doesn't have to be super perfect. So you can see now it's slid off to the side, and our gap, I don't know if you can see, it's a little bit smaller. Okay. So now what? So if you get the files, if you go down to the description, all the files are going to be in the description. But the spacer for the side, what you can do is you can take it into your slicer and I would just set it flat and vertically scale it to the height you need, based off of whatever gap you measure here. So I'd get to this point, and then I would measure the gap. You could print a variety of heights. You know, you could print like a 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, and you could see which one fits. So so I measured about it's a little bit thicker than 0.025. Maybe it's like 0.3. Let's see how that fits. I think 0.3 is gonna be thinner than 0.3 maybe. 0.3 feels pretty good. Let's see if we can go any thicker here. So here we have 0.32. It's thicker than 0.32. So what I can do is I can try combining some maybe where's my 0.1? I want to see if it's like 0.4. Here I'll do try that. Okay, it's thinner than that. So maybe it's like 0.4. All right. And right now it's as close as it can get. So it can actually slide more back this way. So I have this washer here. This washer is printed to be about 0.025. But it probably has a little bit of compression in it because it's plastic. And these serrated rings, if you don't include the serrations, which are going to get compressed down, their edge is it's going to be, yeah. Well, I measured another one earlier. I measured 0.65. This one is 0.7. If I go to inches, we got 0.025. And if we stack them, see, I printed this out thinking that I could get them to be pretty. If I stack them, oh, I think that's going to be perfect. I bet once everything compresses down, it'll be right kind of where we want it in that 0.04 range. So on this side, I'm going to use a little printed washer and the serrated washer. On the other side, the gap was so thin, I just used the serrated washer. But trying to get that gap, I think it is pretty important for minimizing stress on your SMA connector. So I'm just gonna loosen that up on the top, and this is gonna let this float a little bit while we get everything else tightened up. So I need to loosen that. I need to take out the shield, the insert. All right, so now I need to get this connector board back in here, and this board needs to be able to move around while I'm doing that, or we're gonna not have a good time. So I'm just gonna kind of try and see if I can get it in there. I'm gonna loosen it up some more on top. So I have a little bit more space. Okay. I think that'll be good, maybe. All right. Yep. That looks good. All right, and then get my board seated. Ah, beautiful. Okay, everything's fully seated there. I think I'm going to put in the little screw. Okay. I've already taken this out a bunch of times. I should have said something earlier. Some people have had some trouble. I had trouble on this side getting it back in. If you need to, the problem I had was that this really thin part up here was flexing when I was trying to put this adapter back in. One thing that helps is if you can get that top part seated first and then pushing the bottom part. That seems to work well. If you really, really have to go for it, what I would do is I put on the top half of the goggles back together, at least enough so that, this is what I did on the other side, so I kind of seated it in there well enough, trying to be careful I don't break anything. I don't know why it's giving me problems now. Ah. Okay, so I would just try and get it to this point where I can squeeze down there, and then that's going to support the insert when I try and put it back in. So I'm going to put my stack on there, and I think I'm going to put, what do I want to put first? I think I'm going to put the serrated ring first, and then I'm going to put the plastic washer on top of that, and then a sec. I want to show you something else while on the inside. So when you do this, I would actually, when you first try and put this in, I'd have the goggles open. Because as I push this in here, I want to make sure that I'm not gonna dork everything up, that I'm not pushing on the boards. So I'm gonna try and push that in there, and let's see, what's that doing? So I think actually, maybe I was wrong. So if you can see, when I'm pushing that, it's, I don't know if you can see that very well, it's pushing the board, and I really don't want it to push the board around. I want it to just sit up close, but not actually pushing against the board. So I'm going to take that out. And I think what I'm going to do is just cut down the stack a little tiny bit. Just get rid of the washer. By the way, if these are jamming up, I should have checked on this one. You can print them like 5% larger, and that will give you a little bit more of a clearance fit. So now I can try again. And hopefully this time. Oh yeah, so it pushes back a little bit. Some of that's going to be taken out when we tighten up the nut. And up at the top, I think we still have a little bit of wiggle room to work with. So I think we're still good at the top. Like I'm kind of pushing up against that serrated ring, and it seems good. All right. So now there's one more part, which is this washer insert. Just goes in there. This is another part that I think if you want to save yourself from having to print it again, I think I did this on the other one. It's got a little bit of sandpaper and I rolled it up. Probably get rid of that a little bit right there. And I stuffed it in there. Try that again. And counter twist. Let's not get crap all over our goggles if we can't avoid it. Just kind of try and make the hole just a little bit. Because depending on your printer, depending on how well calibrated it is, or your Z height, you know, you might have a little, might not fit quite nicely. Sand that down, let's see if that fits any better. Oh, awesome. Vacuum, you picked a hell of a time. Oh, one moment. Oh, the other side was so easy. We don't want it to be that hard to mess with. Come on. All right. I mean, you kind of want a little bit of a clearance hole here. If I was doing this right, I'd probably go back and make, and on the parts I post, I'll make this clearance hole a little bit larger. I thought I did print one with a larger hole, but I don't know. I'll make it a little bit bigger. Please tell me this fits well. Okay, yeah, I think that's gonna fit nicely. Okay. So we have that in there, and then put my ring washer in there. There we go. Come on. Come on. All right. Yes. All right, cool. And then put our nut on. And I'm tightening up the side one first because I feel like this is the most durable SMA connector in there. And I want it to sort of, I want the side one to set where the board is going to sit precisely before I tighten the top one. So I want the top one to be a little bit loose so that if it needs to shift to the one side or the other side, it can do that. All right, now I can tighten up the top one. So do that. And there we go. No, so now that feels really sturdy to me. I can push around those connectors and the board doesn't move. And the connectors feel pretty rigid. They feel well supported, especially the top one. And that's what I got. Do I have an antenna? Well, I did test fit some antennas. It seems like there was plenty of thread there. That's it. If you have any questions, put them in the comments or go on the HDZero Discord and ask us there. And we'll do our best to help you out. Have a good evening.